brochure and not to big audiences, so my first order of business will be to selfie. Oh, selfie this and look like you're all fascinated. Couple of legs. I'm also going to go on my phone and get my slides. One of the stories that I used to tell myself was that if I was going to stand up and deliver a presentation, I should have it all from memory. Otherwise, it meant I wasn't professional, it wasn't good enough. I think differently now, I've got crap memory, so I'm going to occasionally look at my phone, if that's all right. And let's find the clicker. As Alistair said, I had an experience not so very long ago which forced me to reevaluate a whole bunch of things about how I've been living. And it's interesting for me to be asked to come and speak about this today and contextualise it as to the lies or the deceit that sort of went behind that. Lie might be a bit of a strong word occasionally, but I'm going to try and frame what happened a little bit and give you a perspective on sort of how I feel about those little lies that I told myself. Not just what they did to me, but what that also did to people around me. I've been in market research since 1991 was roughly when I started working in pubs and restaurants, as it happens. And I imagine that when transitioning into adulthood, that's probably when the first of the little lies probably started about expectations, how I thought I should present, how I thought I should look, how I wanted to look, and the reinforcement that delivered. So I suspect I've been giving what I thought I needed to show from the moment I started getting paid to do stuff. More recently, this is me shucking on my performing clothes in 2018, 2019. It's a great privilege to sort of go towards the end of an event like this, whilst also being awful, because I'd much rather have had it done already and sat relaxed, listening to all the rest. But it's been interesting to learn from Alice's presentation earlier that what a con man I've been for so long, about the context and the uniform that I would wear. This would be that sort of thing with a neatly pressed Charles Tyrwhitt, probably, and some shiny shoes. And I would continue to do it, I did continue to do it, for quite some time. Several examples. The timeline of these photos was very shortly, within a matter of weeks in fact, after this is when my huge, debilitating physical and mental breakdown happened. But you wouldn't know it by what I was displaying. And it's only after having learned a whole bunch of things that I've begun to realise that I can and should be a little bit more honest about what I'm thinking and feeling at any one time. And I'm certainly not intending to call anybody out for bullshit today, but in every break there's been an awful lot of, hey, how are you? Fine, thanks, how are you? And statistically at least, about 60% of you on some level will be lying, because you're not all fine all the time. But we have this little dance that we need to do. What led me up to a lot of this was something that I held to be true for a long time, which was that fake it till you make it phrase, that if you act and inhabit a certain skin for long enough, it might come to be true. And actually it did serve me really quite well, up until what I'm going to call the first big lie. I told lots of little lies along the way about how I was, how well I might be, until May 2018, so not terribly long ago. And this is to represent the boardroom that I was in. I was with my boss and a respected colleague, and we were doing strategising about selling some stuff to accelerate sales of something in particular. And I found myself, most unexpectedly, feeling fine, and then almost spontaneously feeling not at all fine. For no particular stimulus, no particular reason, I just began to feel unwell, went from feeling totally normal to really, really not normal, awful in fact, until I had to lean against the wall for a minute so as not to fall. I actually slid down the wall in the boardroom and ended up basically lying under the table, feeling dreadful. Hurt my microphone. Feeling really dreadful. And my colleagues said, can you imagine, asked the question, can you guess what I did? You're right. And I said, quite convincingly, fine, thanks. Not funny, I'm lying on my back, hyperventilating, deeply afraid, actually, sincerely thinking, wondering, is this what a heart attack looks like? Actually thought I might be about to die. But I was so convinced that I needed to keep the clothes on, keep the context alive of the con man that I was, that I, with fierce determination, said, and I'm fine, carry on. Carry on. And unbelievably, they did. not for a long time, but for several minutes they took their pen and went back to the whiteboard and drew some more arrows, some stuff, and I'm hyperventilating on the floor, thinking I might die soon. And in reality then says, like, you're clearly not fine, what can I get you? And I'm thinking, I'm probably having a heart attack, so a cup of water ought to do it. It's funny now. It wasn't funny then. But such is the power of conviction, with my charisma perhaps, but also my reputation and the context in which it was delivered and all of those things, that I had skin in the game for them to believe me, and so did they. Because we all wanted me to be fine and not be dead. So we all kind of gathered in on that, so to speak. And they asked me if I wanted an ambulance. No, I don't. Don't want an ambulance. I don't want to go here. The office was in Ealing. I did end up going to A&E in the end, under much duress. Went in. I'm a sports person. I've played rugby lots of times. I've broken practically all of this, not all at once. I'm no stranger to A&E departments to have bits stitched up and put back together and had a knee replacement and all sorts of things. So I'm very familiar with what the admissions process to A&E looks like, whilst covered in blood and mud and all the rest of it. I have never been admitted so quickly. Never. As I presented, by then, quite calmly, something that looked a bit like this, they asked me a couple of questions, whoosh, straight in. Great, I thought, the services in Ealing is fabulous. But they clearly could see past even the prep that I was trying to sell to them. At that point, I'm fine, I don't really need to be here, to make a fuss. Much time hooked up to an ECG to see if I had some sort of heart, but actually had a mini heart attack, which this would have shown. It showed no such thing. And I began to double down on the idea that this would be some weird little, funny little thing that could be explained away, and it would all be all right later, and I could largely ignore everything that had gone on. They did ask me lots of questions as I was there, which obviously was stuck with how are you feeling. I began the process of telling an absolute load of crap to them about what it was, because I was rather afraid of what actually might be going on behind it. So I was far more afraid of what the truth might reveal. It was much more comfortable for me to perpetuate the lie and look further. So I began the process of looking the other way. I've just gone to A&E, I've just collapsed in the boardroom, I'm 47 at that point, obviously a ripe candidate for a stroke or a heart attack. And yet I have no interest in finding out the real cause. I actually did take a little bit of time off, because that's what you should do if you nearly had a heart attack, just take a couple of days off. That'll do it, in my head. What I wanted, actually, I did want an explanation, but I didn't want the explanation that it almost certainly was. I wanted another one. I wanted an interesting or exotic disease that I could tell an amusing story about, ideally that would have a pill that I could just take. And that would be that. I was so determined to find that all about fabricating surveys and delivering the evidence that supports the view that you've already got. Some of that theme's come up today. Was so determined, you had so many blood tests, I did find such a thing, the slightly unfortunately named Graves' disease, which, as it turns out, it's a bit of a hereditary thing. It's a form of hypothyroidism, and I was only just by a mere fraction of a percent into the band that possibly indicated I might have it later when I was about 70. I thought, brilliant. I have an explanation that I am comfortable with. Not the one that I suspected it probably was, but something else that I could blame it on. So I doubled down on the denial. I became very convincing at the explanation I was comfortable with. Not for the first time today have we had the concept of the snake oil salesman, but the snake oil that I was selling to myself, but not just to myself, to my wife, my colleagues, my family, my friends, and having been a fairly successful salesperson for a fairly long time, everybody was interested in believing it, including me. So we all, in a complicit way, thought, fine, we will believe what James is saying. And can you imagine how many times people asked me how I was? Well, lots, but can you imagine how that went? Hi, James, good to see you. How are you? Fine, thanks. How are you? And they responded in kind, because people do. So the more I beamed out, fine, thanks, how are you, the more people beamed it back. Not really a question. I was looking for evidence to support my fineness, and that evidence did exist. The evidence I was looking at was my sales figures. That was the metric that I was interested in, because that supported the reality that I had constructed, that I was fine. And that was a collaboration that I should ignore. And successfully did. It's a byproduct of the perpetuation of these little lies, which were happening at home every bit as much as at work. I'd come home from work late and pissed, which became entirely normal behaviour for me. Not super pissed and not super late, but a little bit late. And in that lay the unspoken lying by omission, which would be, have you had a hard day with late meetings? That's why you're late. And I would go, that is what's happened. I'd come back with a bag full of beers as well, not stating I'd already been on the pub by myself for 2 hours, drinking a few beers to take the edge off. So lying by omission there. So we were in May 2018. We have skipped forward a little bit, and let's just say as the water was heating up, and I grew more and more used to the normality that I was living in, which also was sleeplessness, night sweats, all sorts of signs and symptoms of fatigue and stress, anxiety. At no point was anybody asking me how I was really. Again, to that point of looking at evidence, that's what my sales figures look like for the duration of my time there. The blue on the right, the blue, not the light blue, the dark blue, the blue, is what I was achieving against the black, which was the target. So you can see actually I really was doing really very well most of the time, commercially except. What happened at a trade show, funnily enough, was a colleague said, how are you? And I went, fine, thanks, how are you? And she basically called me out on it, saw something probably in my face. My face whispered to her. Susan it was, it's not fine. It's not fine. So she clued into that and said, basically said, I don't believe you. How are you really? Because you don't see yourself. I said it kindly, but directly. And I was in Wetherspoons, surrounded by my boss, my boss's boss, her, the most senior person in my team, the whole of the rest of the sales team, and absolutely everybody else in the research industry that had just been to MRS Impact around the corner at Tower Hill. So there was 250 or so people to witness what happened when I told the truth by mistake for the first time, which was I'm not fine. This is too hard. I can't do this anymore. Except I didn't finish the sentence. Instead, I just burst into tears, which turned into sobbing, not like sexy sobbing, more like snot, red face, the weird hiccupy thing you do when you're trying not to let crying come out. And contrary to what I expected, which was ridicule and scorn, I genuinely did think that if people really knew how I felt, that I would be judged harshly for that. I didn't receive any of that. I received everything in kindness and support. Not without irony, since we're in the pub, the other thing I got a great deal of in support in terms of liquid support, in terms of get more beers, which I gratefully accepted because that was the crutch that I had been leaning on for so long. That was the beginning of the panic attack, as it turns out, as of course was the one in May. I had a panic attack at work. I refused to accept or even investigate the truth of that. Here I was having another one, because I doubled down on pursuing the truth that wasn't there, perpetuating the lie. I wasn't listening to the truth that my body was trying to tell me, and mine. So, because I wasn't listening, took action into its own hands, which turned into the physical and mental breakdown. Basically, it was a bit like you get the blue screen of death on your laptop. Laptop goes, enough, my friend. We're closing you down. That's what happened. So, panic attack, 12 days or so duration, ebbed and flowed, ended up losing the power of speech and the power of reading and memory. I was still at work, ridiculously, still saying I'm fine. I clearly wasn't fine, couldn't function at all. 9 months off sick, unable to function as let alone an employee, as a husband, a father, a person, a brother, a son. Couldn't function at all. Hello, funky transition. There we are. And it felt like some of these people, some of these images, there's all sorts of ways to feel a panic attack. It was personal, it was very public. I wouldn't have chosen that to be the epiphany where I began to tell the truth necessarily. Because it was awful, it was not fun at all. But I'm very grateful for it, funnily enough. I've learned the hard way some incredibly valuable lessons that I'm very grateful for. There's more to the story, but we don't have the time to dig into all of it. So I need to sort of encapsulate a couple of the things that I might have learned. Before I go into, actually I'll talk about this cycle in a minute, but just as a sort of an observation of what was going on at home. When I came home every day, over a period of time, very obviously stressed, my wife would go, "Are you okay? Are you stressed at work?" And I would say, "No, I'm not." Look at the numbers. And I was convincing about it. She's not fool, knew quite well, I've been together 20 years. And what happened in the absence of me telling the truth is what she constructed her own. And the truth that she constructed was that I was having an affair. Because I was coming back uncommunicative, closed in, late, pissed. So she filled in her own blanks. So funny enough, the truth that she constructed was worse than the actual truth that I thought I was protecting her from. No one is there. I wasn't having an affair. with a person, at least. I was having an affair with my job, which got all of my effort and love and energy, and there wasn't anything left for me or for her. Anyway, so there was a cycle. I got locked into a cycle, and just to sort of illustrate it, going back to what you bunch of liars in the audience, but everyone said, "Hi, how are you?" and everyone's going fine, thanks. Some of you genuinely, of course, will be absolutely fine and will be really pleased to have seen that particular person, but we will also would have done the social dance. Fine, thanks, how are you? I'm fine too, how are you? And then we move on, because they're not real questions. And the trouble was, nobody ever challenged me until Susan did that day about it. But are you? That didn't stop long enough to break the pattern, to make me think and answer the question properly. So I would suggest, and I've learned it time and time again in the last couple of years, that if someone goes first, and often that someone is me, when I've made a conscious decision to no longer perpetuate that cycle, as actually, mind you, not everywhere and all the time, but generally now when people ask me how I am, I would assume it's a real question, even though half the time it isn't, but just in case it is, I'll offer out a slightly different answer that's a bit more honest, and then I'll ask them how they are. And one of the ways to help break that cycle is to ask the question slightly differently. I've also learned that if you go first, people will tend to follow. They'll tend to mirror what you've done. And there's a real mutual benefit to that. Because I didn't know how I was feeling until someone forced me to articulate it. I still don't really know what I think and feel until I articulate it. I thought I ought to know how I think and feel by just thinking it and feeling it. Turns out it's much easier to process more clearly, verbally, or in the written form if you like journaling. It doesn't have to be a person either, it can be to a dog, or a lamppost, or a tree. I find it much easier out than in. So as an example, hey, how are you? I'd say, fine, thanks, how are you? But how are you really? Oh, I'm fine too, but how are you really? It's a completely different question. You can use gestures in your face to convey that it's actually the same question. We don't advocate that you give time for the answer. If you're generally going to ask the question, do let them answer. Sometimes they're not fine, and actually perhaps the intervention that that person needs more than anything else that day, week, month, year might just be for someone to go, but how are you really? And if they're still not quite there, perhaps you don't know them that well. Perhaps it might be you to say, actually, it's really stressful life at the moment. My fuel bill's fucking crazy. I can't afford milk as much as I did last week, whatever it is. Actually, I'm not. It's hard right now, right? And they'll follow in that space, like it's not. How about you? So I quite like the idea of breaking the cycle. And if you don't really want to know the answer to the question, but you still want to appear polite, and I think I've probably learned this off Gordon Ramsay of all people, if you ever watch his Kitchen Nightmare show, he never says how are you to the people he's about to tear to pieces in their awful restaurants. He just says, good to see you. That might also be a lie, but at least it's not an inquiry about how somebody is at a question that we don't want to know the answer to. I really like the idea now of going first to create the space and opportunity. I've also learned that if it's okay for someone that looks and sounds like me to talk openly about stuff like this, generally it makes it okay for someone else to have that go too. I read this quote the other day. I was reading a book on resilience as part of my work. I love two things about this particular book. One was that resilience is a thing that you do rather than a thing that you have, which I think is quite an empowering statement. But I happened to read this. I thought, yes, that's it, isn't it? We don't necessarily have to be friends all the time. But that is when a connection is formed. You go, oh yeah, me too. It's getting a bit preachy now. So I will say that this is true for me. The truth helped set me free. And it's helped others too. And it's useful in this for me to be reminded what a conversation actually looks like. And it's when things are shared. It's not where one-way inquiries are made and nothing's shared in return. Well, if anybody wants to have a chat, but I will ask you a semi-rhetorical question again for the second time today, pointing at the incredibly poignant bit above the wall. And that would be just to gently ask, how are you really? Thank you very much.